Hello and welcome to Genius Tea Time with Badly Lit Bear. Thank you so much for joining us. This is terrific. I'm really glad you could do this.
Thank you.
Um, all right. I am going to pull up your information so I can introduce you in your own words. That is, Badly Lit Bear is an educator, writer, artist, and mutual aid worker. They teach storytelling and sell circle-shaped stories. Their work is rooted in shifting identity, Looney Tunes, BDSM, deep observation, and their lived experience as an Indigiqueer transfemme. They are currently engaged in a year-long project as a culture bearer by the Central for Cultural Power to teach queer, two-spirit, and transgender Indigenous youth to make their own ribbon skirts. They also write on media and gender diversity issues. And would you like to tell us about Sex Workers Outreach Project Los Angeles, or SWAP LA, the
Mhm.
organization we're sponsoring?
Yeah, so SWAP is a national organization with chapters in different cities. And each chapter tends to have its own flavor, as it were. And
Mm,
it's a project, and so depending on the city that you're in, it might have different forms of advocacy. But essentially, it's one of the many organizations that advocates for sex workers. Sex work is a big part of my life. It's a big part of a lot of my peers and colleagues' lives. And of the organizations where I don't actually serve on their board or don't have say, a conflict of interest um, for asking for donations for them, SWAP is absolutely an organization that I think really highly of. A lot of people that I tend to think of as leaders in that community are members of SWAP LA. And they do all kinds of work that ranges from outreach to people who do street level work, to people who do, dancer work, to people who work with private client work, and lots of stuff around sexual health, lots of stuff around safety. And like, for example, one of the most important things that SWAP LA does is they maintain a bad client list, which if you happen to have ever been a sex worker or been into that world, is a list of people
mm,
you should never meet with. And these are spreadsheets. These are oftentimes kept kind of behind not a paywall, but a bit of an internet firewall. And this is the only way that sex workers in an era where sex work is persecuted and not decriminalized, as it should be, can oftentimes protect themselves. Sex workers have increasingly fewer protections under American law. This has been getting worse for most of the past 10 years, and it really really began to get worse under the Obama administration
mm.
and has continued under both Trump and Biden at the national level. And the kinds of federal policies and state level policies we're seeing around sex work and some degrees around pornography as well, which is part of the industry, but around the distribution of pornography, are create real safety work issues for sex workers and make their lives more dangerous, make their lives more difficult. And that's sort of the system working as intended. And organizations like SWAP advocate, to educate that system as to what its real effects in the world are.
Excellent and very, very worthy. And now you you want to tell us about the ribbon skirts workshop.
Yeah.
That's amazing, by the way.
So I started working with ribbon skirts when I was working on a project in Navajo Nation with Christina Wong last year.
Hmm.
Um, Christina's working on a new project, and somehow that project it's a very red story that has like a whole bunch of steps. But basically, it went from working with this sort of like convenience store that would be from all normal perspectives in the middle of nowhere that was serving a dramatically underserved community in a food desert to them asking Christina to come out with me and do and facilitate ribbon skirt workshops, which is
Wonderful.
interesting because Christina and I are not ribbon skirt makers historically. We're not people who do this. We're mostly known. Christina's the founder and overlord, as it were, of the Auntie Sewing Squad, which is an 800 member COVID era mask making and distribution organization. I'm the logistics super auntie for the Auntie Sewing Squad, and a lot of my work deals with basically transporting any manner of necessary goods between Los Angeles and Navajo Nation,
Mm.
working with partner organizations in Navajo Nation. And so for the past plus years, Christina and I have become increasingly engaged with our peers and our partner organizations in Navajo Nation. She's currently working in Arizona a lot with an ASU sponsored project that touches on this. And so we ended up going out there to Pinyon, which is in Navajo Nation, and facilitating over a period of 10 days a series of ribbon skirt workshops. And
Wow.
yeah, and the funny thing is like in the Auntie Sewing Squad, I actually don't sew, famously. I am a sewist. I have a lot of sewing equipment in my house. I make a lot of my own clothes. I have been a sewist since I was like 6. I mean, I'm really comfortable behind a sewing machine. And and so I think I was brought out mostly as like technical assistance and logistical assistance, which is an area I tend to specialize in. And then I ended up learning how to make ribbon skirts and also learning how to teach other people to make ribbon skirts. And it was during that process that that I was sort of tasked, as it were, by elders in Navajo Nation to say, like, yeah, you should be sharing this with other people. Like, it'd be great if more people knew how to do this. Like, like, yeah, you should go teach people to do this. And that led to me making my proposal to the Center for Cultural Power. It's one of these like sort of end of pandemic era grants. Money has to get spent. It's for the arts. It's earmarked for the arts. And and I got a large award and then a lot
Nice.
of donations to support a year-long project to travel around and teach ribbon skirts. It's been
Cool.
complicated to get it going because for medical reasons, I had a major surgery earlier this year, and I'm having a major surgery in about 2 weeks, 2.5 weeks.
Ooh, ooh.
So my project is somewhat like on a different timeline than the other projects due to medical stuff. But I'm glad that
Okay.
we've finally gotten it kicked off in Los Angeles, at least. It's a challenging project to bring to people, and I'll talk about that in a second. I want to share screen now
I was going
and
to
kind of
say,
talk
let's
about what
show us
is
a ribbon skirt.
yeah, what is a ribbon skirt?
Yeah.
All right, so hold on, let me open the folder real quick, and uh-huh. and I'm gonna try to do this the right way. Okay, so this is me wearing a ribbon skirt. This is just a normal photo of a person wearing a ribbon skirt. And what a ribbon skirt is ribbon skirts are worn generally by Indigenous people from the plains area of the United States. Is like, but historically that would be like where they kind of emerged from, right? But they're worn all across the United States by Indigenous people. Um, they can be worn for any purpose. This is really important to note. Ribbon skirts can be worn for ceremonial purposes or as part of regalia, and there are ribbon skirts that are made very intentionally with like very specific designs and very specific color patterns that indicate something about the wearer and possibly relate to what they're participating in. That's not what I do. I'm not here to teach people how to make really formal ribbon skirts. Most ribbon skirts aren't like that. And and so like the patterns on ribbon skirts tend to be reflections of the wearer's personal taste. Um, this ribbon skirt actually is a minimalized version of the leather pride flag. Everybody, which of course nobody in Navajo is making this one in Navajo Nation. Nobody knows what that is, so they're like, "We like the heart." Like it's it's like elders. You're working with a lot of elders and a lot of children when you're there, and and the elders are like, "We like the heart," like they fabricated, and like so nobody is like, "Why are you putting a heart on the ribbon skirt?" They're like, "That's adorable," and that's a really good attitude to have for this kind of thing. The reason I applied for this grant is because a lot of queer, two-spirit, trans, or otherwise gender diverse people in Indigenous communities don't have access to their own Indigenous community anymore. They don't have
Mm,
access to their culture. They don't have access to resources. These are under-resourced communities in the first place. These are the poorest places in North America. The average Native American woman makes 64 cents on the dollar. The average white woman makes 96 cents on the dollar. It's really, really important to start breaking down those like how resources work by race, right? Because like the average American woman still makes under 80 cents on the dollar. But when you start breaking that down by race, you see these dramatic differences. Native American women are the lowest resourced group of people in the United States by race. The only group of people who make less money on the dollar than Native American women are transgender women, who make 60 cents on the dollar. So, like, so if you happen to be gender diverse and you happen to be Native American, you are in America's lowest resource community, and that's a very big generalization. If you're living on a reservation, you're in an even more lower resource community. The fabric on this is like licensed Realtree pink camouflage fabric, which we purchased at the Joann's or the Walmart in Flagstaff, which is 3 hours from Pinion, where we did these workshops. So if you want really nice fabric, first of all, it's expensive, right? Per yard. This is not the cheapest fabric a person could sew with. It's a licensed pattern. But secondly, you have to drive 3 hours in each direction from your home, deep in the middle of Navajo Nation. And so Navajo Nation is it's larger both in size and population than Rhode Island. It is larger than some states. But it is under-resourced in tremendous, tremendous ways. And so Christina got working there because it's a food desert, and that's kind of what led us into this. And then, in that exploration, we learned how to make ribbon skirts. And then I decided that it would be imperative to bring this to other under-resourced Indigenous people, in other communities. And I'm hoping, yeah, there we go. Is it cycling through the slide?
Yep, it is.
So this is me working with Little Bobbin, right? Little Bobbin is the greatest and most useless assistant you'll ever have. No, she's absolutely precious and lovely. This is what we were working in the Pinion gym.
Hi, I'm gonna interrupt. I'm
Yes.
still on the first slide with you,
Okay.
and it may or may not have changed for everyone.
Okay,
oh, there we go. Person, it's changed now.
Okay. So yeah, so I should be like on a red table right now, sewing at a machine. That's what I'm seeing.
That's what I am seeing as well.
Okay, great. And so here we are. This is us in Navajo Nation, doing a workshop. A huge amount of these workshops is just helping people with technical sewing, right? So in the case of someone like Little Bobbin, like she doesn't know how to use a sewing machine at all, right? And she can't make a ribbon skirt, so we have to kind of help her make one. I was kind of helping her do different kinds of things. She also doesn't know how to do a lot of basic technical stuff. Way in the background there, in the red, you can see Auntie Edith, who's an elder, who really, really was helpful during this process and really inspirational to me in terms of her competence. She has an incredible story of being a seamstress in LA in the 40s and 50s. It's a wild American LA native story that has a love affair. I mean, she's an incredible, incredible woman and a weaver. So she's we were lucky to work with people like her who are really, really living treasures when it comes to people who can maintain traditional arts. Wait, other way, sorry. This is me and Teresa Hathley, who is a state senator, and we work with her a lot. This is me with a different ribbon skirt in a different chapter house, working on ribbon skirts again. Again, the Realtree camouflage fabric makes its appearance. This is a trans pride skirt that I made. Teresa's a big partner of the Auntie Sewing Squads. And then this is me and Christina and Brenda Hosky and Brenda's lovely dogs. And this is a 4th of July event. And so one of the things, I love this image because Christina Wong is a, Chinese American woman who's wearing a ribbon skirt, right? And of course it wouldn't be really great for Christina to wear a ribbon skirt at a formal Indigenous occasion where she might be a little out of place anyways. But this is a fashion ribbon skirt. I don't know what kind of cute pattern. I think it's cats or something, right? She has cats on her ribbon skirt. And then, this was at a 4th of July party at Brenda's house. And I wanted to say that people really, people who don't live and at all with or in relationship to Indigenous culture on reservations really don't understand the relationship that Native Americans have to the United States. It's really complicated. Native Americans who live on reservations are often incredibly patriotic in ways that Native Americans who live in urban areas are not, because the history of Native Americans on reservations is very tied to the history of being a veteran. A lot of people have veterans in their family. The Navajo Nation takes extreme pride in being to some degree responsible for the United States winning the Pacific War during what we call World War II against Japan, because we had Navajo code talkers who basically made it possible for the Americans to like essentially engage in intelligence activities and communications activities. They're incredibly proud of these relationships. And so like it might seem weird for people who like, you know, think of Indigenous people as like we're here and ready to fight the government at all costs and whatnot. But you know, like this is like a from a 4th of July party where we're eating traditional food, people are watching football on TV, and like Brenda loves her new American flag ribbon skirt, which we didn't make. It was just one she happened to be wearing that day. And what I like to say is that like when it comes to how formal or informal ribbon skirts are, and I say this in my statements a lot, one of the women in the workshop said, I'm going to wear this to chase my sheep, right? Which is about the messiest thing you're going to do, right? Like you're going to wreck that skirt. And so like ribbon skirts are things that can be worn for ceremonial purposes or as part of regalia. They can be representative of one's tribal or clan identity in various complex ways. They can also be worn casually or as fashion items. And how to do that respectfully for people who aren't native, that's something you need to learn how to do. A lot of native culture is about learning by observing and by participating and stuff. So I teach workshops for Indigenous folks generally, but I sometimes end up teaching people who are not necessarily Indigenous to the United States. You know, non-Indigenous people are oftentimes guests at things like powwows and ceremony. And it's, you know, if you happen to be somebody who would wear a skirt into a sweat lodge, for example, having a ribbon skirt is really, really nice. And a lot of people don't have those skills or that access. So other way. So this is, and then come forward to the LA workshops. This is Genesis, who is somebody I've been working with for a long time. She let me use her pictures. And she's like learning how to use a sewing machine here right now. Now, I owe Genesis a slight apology because I did say in like a Facebook and an Instagram post like Genesis couldn't sew a straight line a week ago, and she really couldn't. But her mother and father both work as tailors and seamstresses, but they have never like Genesis does not know how to sew on a machine. And it's, you know, she's in her 20s, and it isn't something that has come up in her life before as something she needed to learn how to do. And I've seen a skirt her mom made her, and it's like I'm embarrassed. Like I'm like, no, like don't look. I hope her mom's not inspecting my stuff too closely. Her mom is incredible. Seamstress. Her dad works for Disney in costuming and stuff, but she's never really worked a sewing machine. So it was actually pretty easy to teach Genesis how to do this because she does understand the basics of it. One of the biggest challenges and differences of teaching ribbon skirts in LA as opposed to on the res is that like, you know, I don't encounter people in LA who really, really know how to use a sewing machine. It's, you know,
Interesting. Yeah.
It's not something that people in a city like LA grow up with. So people at the ribbon skirt workshops are like, they don't know how to advance the fabric. Like it doesn't occur to them to put the presser foot down when they're sewing. And a lot of us who grew up around, you know, sewing machines, sewing, making your own clothes, you know, maybe our parents made their own clothes. My adoptive mother is like in her 80s and was born in Canada in like 1936. So like they grew up making their own clothes and stuff like that, right? And that seems normal to me. People on the res still live like that. They might make their own clothes. They might do a lot of repair of their own clothes. And so having a sewing machine in the house is a normative thing, you know. Complex sewing projects that don't have a pattern and require you to remember mathematical formula are a thing, right? This is a huge part of women's culture historically, like all of this incredibly complex math, you know, that like is the knowledge of women that is generally not written down or is like in a notebook, you know, and like a lot of is about ratios and oddball things where like it's like there might be a lot of technical measurement and then like some weird eyeballing and then you have your own way of doing it, you know, that's like your style. And it's like this incredible body of women's knowledge that like oftentimes doesn't get enough attention. And it's increasingly not present in places like urban areas like in LA. What
Yeah.
I've learned from teaching these workshops in LA is how much I'm teaching people how to sew, right? How much I learned that on the res too. When I was teaching in Pinion or at Hard Rock chapter, you know, like in the res, we taught a number of locations. like there were a lot of people who like really, really couldn't change the bobbins on their machine very well or manage the tension and stuff. So these are skills that are really being lost. They're
Yeah.
not intuitive skills. They seem intuitive to those of us who have them, but they're not intuitive. And so it's like I'm like thinking like, like how basic do I need a sewing class to be? Like, I'm also going to be teaching like a sewing class, a machine sewing class at a summer camp for trans and gender diverse youth that I volunteer at in a couple weeks, in like a week and a half. And like I had to design, I'm like, okay, what's the simplest project I can, I really realized from teaching this how simple that needs to be in order to like get them to like feel like they own anything, feel like they've completed anything. Because those are really short workshops. So they'll be making stuffed shapes and maybe some cute stuffed animal like things and stuff like that, but nothing that requires fitting it to the body. That's complicated. And ribbon skirts are really easy. I mean, they basically have a big elastic waistband. It's like the easiest garment you could possibly make. I know people who make ribbon skirts and like they make them with like what's called a paper bag waist, which is like the easiest kind of waist you can put on a thing. They're not fitted. I've never seen a ribbon skirt that was fitted. Like I've always seen them with elastic. I'm sure they exist, fitted ribbon skirts to size, but um, if you're gonna eat as much fry bread, I think as you should, I think you might want that elastic. Okay, and then here's Jen in the finished ribbon skirt. This is one of the ones that got finished out of our workshop in LA.
So
And
cute.
yeah, she seems absolutely pleased with this. This kind of ribbon skirt design, you'll notice, I like this design a lot. It's two-tiered. So a lot of ribbon skirts are just one color of fabric. And the reason I oftentimes do a two-tiered skirt and why I help Jen do one, which takes a lot more time to join two pieces together and like recut them a second time, is when you don't have enough fabric to make a skirt. So it's a great way to use scraps. It's a great way to like, if you've got that cute pattern and you've only got like 1 yard, you can get it in there as a stripe. And yeah, and so I tend to do that. There's another kind of skirt that gets worn in Navajo Nation called a tiered skirt, three-tiered skirt, which has like ruffled or ruched. It gets kind of, they're actually really easy to make if you know how to make them because they don't have any ribbons. But if you don't know how to like basically make poofy stuff, that's a skill unto itself. And I don't have it. I'm not teaching it, but I'd like to learn that. And I think one way of telling people who aren't native about this that's useful is to say that like I really feel comfortable teaching ribbon skirts to Indigenous people and sometimes people who aren't Indigenous as well. I don't know if I'd teach a three-tiered skirt to other people because it's a very Navajo specific garment.
Gotcha.
Yeah. I'm going to stop sharing now.
Cool. Speaking as somebody who professionally has taught sewing for a long time and also has been doing that for costumes, there's a real change generationally in non-reservation culture of who is sewing and who is not.
Yes.
Have you found that specifically? Like I was finding I had younger people who had not had anything but heard about it from their grandparents, and then people who used to do it in junior high school. And then there's this whole group in the middle who learned nothing.
Only in LA, I'm encountering people who've clearly never used a machine before. At least for these workshops who are interested. And I think it's a real barrier. I think that people don't feel like it's really it's like doing car maintenance. And I'm going to be honest with you. Doing like tension, like tensioning machines, keeping machines in order is a real mechanical skill. I don't feel like I have it. I have a Genome over here, which if you don't know is a really, I have like a $500 like fancy heavy duty machine over here, and it is so out of tension, bottom tension right now because I tend to in my own life sew really, really heavy fabrics. I tend to do a lot of patchwork stuff with canvas and denim. Oftentimes I'm sewing through 7, 8, 10 layers of denim at a time. And I wreck machines. And so I'm really picky about what machines I'll sew on. And I definitely push machines to their limits, and I don't feel bad about it. It's a cost of doing business for me. But like it is really, really hard to maintain a sewing machine. And it's increasingly hard to like, I live near the garment district. I can like walk 2 blocks from here, and there's like places with professional machines outside, or if I hand them something like a Singer Heavy Duty, which is like the most basic industrial sewing machine that people use. The Singer Heavy Duty is the workhorse of costuming in every film and movie you've ever seen. If you go to the Costumers Guild in LA, it'll literally be like 20 Singer heavy duties in a row. And then there's specialty machines, right? But they're the easiest to service and they're the cheapest one to break and just toss out. And you know, but they are hard to service and they're hard to maintain, and they're frustrating. And I learned so much about how to teach sewing from this. Like people donate like thread to us, and like I actually take all the donated thread and I keep it in another pile because like if your top and your bottom thread aren't the same brand of thread, the tension doesn't set right. And like as a sophisticated sewist, like sometimes I can fudge the machine to work for that project, you know, with the 40-year-old spool of cotton thread. But that thread's like decayed. The plastics, if it's like polyester thread, have started to break down. It's no longer, it's like, and so I like really had to learn how to keep things as simple as possible. When we were in Navajo Nation, we had so many problems with like threading and tension. Dog is
Yeah.
wondering it. We had so many problems with that kind of stuff, that I really like simplified the process as much as possible. And the same thing with like ribbon widths and stuff. So I had to learn to like make things as simple as possible so that people learning how to sew don't wander into the creative weeds so much that it's hard for them to actually complete the project. You know, and I learned how to sew at home as a child. I bought my adoptive mother's sewing machine from her, which she regrets selling me. It's like a Ricard. It's like an all steel Ricard, and it like it's
Ooh.
impossible to service. It's I think I may have destroyed that machine sewing heavy stuff on it for 20 years. I may have like actually bent stuff inside the machine. And then you know, and I took clothing construction and fashion design courses in college when I was like in my teens. I thought that I wanted to go into fashion as a teenager because I was making all my own clothes. I later realized I didn't really want to make anything for anybody else. I just wanted to like be really good at making my own stuff. And then like for a period of time as an artist, I exhibited a lot of like things that would be considered like fiber art and stuff like that. And I have a distinctive sewing style that would be very difficult for other people to reproduce because it's like it all involves a certain kind of patchwork and a relate and like it's a system that like is very individuated. And sometimes I'll meet somebody, you know, like and they'll talk about what I'm working on like it's my artwork or something. Like I'm like my clothing that I wear is contemporary art, and it's not. It's simply the clothing that I wear. And I wish people would stop doing things in their lives and like claiming their contemporary art. This is my hot take for the day. Like it's like, no, that's just your life. And I'm glad your life is interesting, but like it doesn't need to move into the museum or be treated as if it's like, you know, a fine object in the same way. That being said, like, you know, like I have jackets and like the skirt that I'm wearing, like right now, that have hundreds of hours of hand sewing and machine sewing in them, you know, sometimes many hundreds of hours. And like people ask, I've had people try to buy stuff from me, and I'm like, this is, I'd be like, it would cost me like 10 grand because it would be like,
Yeah.
that's, you know, like it took 5 years to sew out this jacket, you know, and it was like a project over 5 winters or something. And so, um, you know, I've been sewing for a long time. And so I've had to really like dial down to where people are at, which we always have to do as teachers, and figure out what people need. And that's really shaping like future workshops, because I'm going to take a little bit of a break after this series of workshops in LA. And then I'm having a major surgery. And then I'm also moving and some other stuff. And I'll be doing workshops again starting in September. And I'll might change the structure of things and even offer some like intro to sewing workshops just to get people ready to do the ribbon skirt workshop. People on the res, we had a team, we had a day where we taught nothing but teens. Every single one of them knew how to use a sewing machine off the bat. Every single one of them knew how to use a sewing machine. You know, and if they didn't know how to do it in a familiar, like they'd done it way, like they knew how, they had an idea of how it worked. And so the sewing machine is like, as a craft skill, is like the manual transmission. There's a generation that like, even if you like, I haven't driven a manual in like many years, right? But if I
It's been a
had
while.
tried a manual, like I could do it, right? I owned a Volkswagen. You know, I wish I owned my old Volkswagen now. It was a mistake to sell it, but you know, I like driving a manual, but it's just been a long time. You know, like there are young people today who've never driven a car that wasn't an electric car, right? I mean, there's people who like they grew up. There's people who've been actually given their parents old EV, right? And
Wow.
so, like the sewing perspective, I encounter people who basically like it's not that they're underskilled, they really aren't exposed to the technology in a basic way, and it's so much harder for them to learn it. They didn't watch their mom, usually their mother, so um, sewing in terms of gender tends to be like a lot of the household sewing skills tend to be women's skills, and there's like men who sew historically have been highly skilled professionals in certain areas. Like my grandfather, whose iron is right there. I hated this man, by the way. He's a horrible man, but he was like a terrible man, my adopted grandfather. But like I have his iron, and that iron's at least 60, 70 years old, and it's still going, and
Dang.
that's my workhorse. It like plugs in. I don't it does have a reservoir for spritzing at things, right? But I actually use it with an alcohol bottle, like a costumer might, you
Yeah.
know, and yeah, and like I grew up with that kind of stuff. And so um I think people get interested in sewing and interested in making things, and then they learn, but it takes many years to be someone who could just like sit at the machine, with your mouth full of pins, like 5 pins sticking
All
out.
the time. All the time.
Yeah, you have 5 pins in your mouth, you're making that face. And the biggest change for me in sewing is I'm now in my reading glasses era. So I'm now like, and I'm lucky that I'm lucky as a sewist that I am like a kinesthetic learner, like a body oriented person. And so like I can find the needle with my by feel, not by I don't look. I mean, I look a little bit, but like I can kind of like feel where the thread's going, because I can't see it anymore.
Oh no.
I can't see it. Yeah, I was so excited when I bought the Genome machine because I was like, oh, this has an auto threader. And the auto threader like works 30% of the time, and I
I
hate it.
know.
And
They're
I like want to tear it
terrible.
out of the machine. So
Hate them.
yeah.
I hate them with a passion. Uh, oh, it's really great. Does anyone have any questions? Otherwise, I have plenty. If you want to pipe on up, or if you prefer to write them in the chat, that's totally fine too.
Hi there. Sorry, I was a little bit late. Yeah, I want to know about the stuff. It was really cool, like, and especially like talking about like putting all the different fabrics together. Like, I'm so about that. Like, I have so much fabric that I'm really excited always like to collect them, but it's just like pile up. But so I was wondering, at your workshop, do you get the strings and all those yourself, or should I bring them, or should
Oh,
I
I
get
have like
the
all the
specific?
materials. I
Yeah.
have the way to do this kind of workshop is to bring all of the materials. So like luckily when I started doing this, lots and lots of people donated tons
Oh,
of ribbon and stuff, tons of fabric. Luckily, you only need like cotton fabric for this. You can use some other fabrics, but it has to be like a non-stretch fabric. And there's sometimes you'll make a ribbon skirt out of something that's like not really cottony, or maybe it's poly cotton, and it works okay, right? But not every fabric is good for ribbon skirts. You want it to be as light as possible. So like on Jen's skirt, that top, that green is a little heavy. And that's
okay.
actually that green is like leftover fabric from I think it's leftover fabric from the Auntie Sewing Squad for like mask making fabric.
Mm.
Um, and we're going to be going through that for a year through years. I mean, but you're talking about the problem that every sewist has. I have in my garage bins of fabric, some of which I bought in the 90s and like made like weird raver pants out of, like stuff like weird crap out of. Like I'm gonna make my own. I have a double-sided lime yellow, lime green padded like puffer jacket material that was vintage when I bought it in like 1994. It was like from the 70s, and I'm still like, should I make something with this? And
It's
that's how
time enough right now. It'll be
yeah.
fashionable again.
I give away as much fabric as I've learned to give away as much as I don't need. And one of the reasons I got involved with the Auntie Sewing Squad, because I was working so much at the beginning of the pandemic. Like, so I was like in this overload. I was managing my whole department's day-to-day operations. I was like engaged in this huge effort to keep the biggest department at the college I work at, which is Otis College, alive. And bye, Linda.
Bye, Linda.
I love Linda. I'm so glad
Aw.
you guys
Thank you
came.
so much for joining us.
And and like I got involved with Christina Wong. I'm like, I can't do shit right now, but I can drive over to your house and I can bring you all the fabric I have. And like I brought her all these t-shirts. I used to own a gallery, and I had this entire giant bin of like t-shirts that were made for some exhibition at some point by like I think Royal Skateboards or something like that. Like one of the skateboard companies I used to like have a lot of designers that work with. And I just brought them all over. And I'm like, just here they go. You know,
Toodles.
everything must go. And yeah, and so I think for a sewist, you should always be trying to get rid of fabric. That's my thought. If you're not going to use it, you learn to know you're not going to use it. People often give me stuff that they think I'd like that's denim or canvas, and I've learned to say no. I've also
Yeah.
learned that I just have to toss things, or like when I have to make a lot of rags, you know. So and I most of the stuff I make um work with is like I tend to work in like black denim and stuff, like 12, 14 weight denim and stuff. So it's like I bought like a 30-yard roll of that years ago, and I'm still using stuff off that roll. I remember buying that roll, and like the guy I had to go to like the garment district in LA used to be way weirder and cooler. I had to like go to the third floor and negotiate with this guy, you know, and like and he like wouldn't sell me anything less than the entire roll. I'm like, well, yeah, I'll buy you the whole roll. I remember he loaded the entire roll into my car, you know, like 4 cars ago, and I'm still using that stuff. You'll never get rid of all the stuff.
Mhm.
Like you're gonna get old and be buried, and like people are gonna be cleaning out your shit. And there's gonna be fabric we bought when you were like 20 in there. You know, it's just the way
Yeah,
it works.
I have fabric. I have fabrics from my grandma.
Mhm.
Like, yeah, I love them. I've seen them my whole entire life, and then I'm just like, oh, I'm moving to another state. I'm gonna take them still, but
Some of
yeah.
that stuff, it's like it's precious, you know, like
Mhm.
and then there's stuff that's hard to work with. Like I happen to be someone who owns several furs that are probably not salvageable and they can't legally be sold anymore. And so it's like, are these useful? Can they be restored in any kind of way? Do these become collars on stuff? Native folk in the United States, for those who are listening to this at any point in the future, like we tend to like and be enthusiastic about fur unapologetically. So you know, but I happen to inherit a lot of that stuff, and it's like, what can I do with it? And it's like super precious. I have a full length fur coat that I'm like, do I wear this because it fits me? You know, do I have this restored and wear it, or do I try to make something out of it? I don't even want to know how much it would cost. Like, not, I don't know. I have no idea how much a thing like that would
But
cost.
that it's really hard to sew those. Like with the machine, can you do that with the same like heavy duty Singer?
You can I've never encountered a high quality fur that wasn't a combination of machine sewing and hand stitching, and more hand stitching than you'd see. The
Yeah.
linings on the linings on that kind of stuff tend to be like basted in like really lightly so they can be serviced and stuff. It's a bit like Japanese clothing where it's designed oftentimes to be taken apart into individual pieces of fabric and then resewn in when it gets cleaned. So there's some really formal like Japanese clothing where you actually clean it in like sand and dust. It never gets wet. So it's a weird way of cleaning silk, which I think is not just Japanese, but yeah. Good luck with all that fabric.
I'll praying bunch next week.
Yeah. So yeah. Other questions, folks? I love answering questions.
No. When did you? What were some of the first projects you sewed? Like,
Uh,
do you remember?
oh God, this is embarrassing. There was a transitional point in my sewing. I lead a certain kind of life, and there was a point when I was like 12 and I was learning how to sew. I was getting annoyed. I was learning how to sew on the machine, but I was also annoyed that I couldn't make my adopted mother like make stuff for me that I wanted. And I actually had her sew. Okay, like this is the nerdiest thing that I'm ever gonna say on camera. I had her sew a pair. There was a pair of these made. They're very simple, but they were like hooded wizard robes. like for a Halloween costume, and one was in blue flannel, and I slept in it for years. It was like the softest thing. It was like sleeping in a big fluffy flannel thing. But the other was in black, and it had like a hood, and it was like canvas or something. And I went and like I was in seventh grade when this was made, and I started wearing it. I would wear it to school. I would like literally go to school in like a wizard's robe. Like I was like, it was, yeah. I don't know how often I did this. It's one of those things where like maybe I only did it around Halloween for a little while, or maybe I did it for a long period of time. There have been long periods in my life where I've um, done a thing, and like I like really since I was a kid, I've been doing, like I've been doing things with clothing that are like that could be seen as like long durational performances by other people, but I don't think of them like that necessarily. Some of them I do. So but right around that time I was like 12, I got really frustrated. I'm like, okay, like I started getting very independent in a variety of ways, and my home life was not good. And right around then is when I bought the sewing machine from Molly, and then and started making stuff, and I didn't really know what I was doing. And then I was really repairing stuff. And then by the time I was like, I think by the time I was like 16 or so, or 15, I was repairing things, right? I was repairing. No, it's funny because like I went over to her house for the first time in 4 years yesterday. We have a very estranged relationship. And I was in her upstairs like little like den officey room, and the sewing machine that she bought to replace her old machine is sitting there. And I said, "Are you still using this?" And she said, "I'm not giving it to you." Yeah, she knew that I was like trying to get it. She's like, "No, I'll never use it again. You can't have it." But I bought a lot of stuff from her, and I started repairing this one shirt. Um, it was a Vietnam era like button up, fatigue, and it belonged to somebody named Lieutenant Colonel Johnson. And I remember I started repairing it and modifying it, and like with tiny like 1 inch by 1 inch patches. And so the entire thing has over 2,000 patches on it now. And it's overstitched. And it's like it's this thing. And I wore that shirt in a number of performances over the years. And it's also part of a formal on like an ensemble with a not a matching pair of pants, but a complementary lower half that like weighs about, it's all patchwork, and it weighs about 10 pounds. Like the pants weigh about 10 pounds and have kind of a built-in zippered corset that goes up to like here. Um, and so I was like repairing stuff all of the time. And I'm still wearing a lot of clothes from when I was a teenager. Like this is theoretically part of my work as a person, is that like I just keep repairing the same stuff. Like I've been living in the post-apocalypse for a very long time. That's kind of it. And when I first started exhibiting stuff, it was like that kind of stuff. It was like, this is a garment that like I was annoyed because like was exhibiting my clothing in galleries. And I would be in these like group shows and things that you get in when you're young, like when you don't have a career and stuff. And they were like, and your stuff is in a random group of stuff. And like I went to one of these shows in like not in like I just went anonymously. I was like there, and the woman who was giving the tour started talking about my work, because my work had won an award in the show or something. And she started talking about it like she's like, this artist is really into recycling and sustainability. And I'm like, I'm not, that's not what my work is about. And this has come up consistently. A lot of my work as an artist has a lot to do with like the apocalypse, the post-apocalypse, like I worked with the theme of pandemic flu for 5 years. That I have a whole history with like in the aughts. So I did a lot of work around pandemics in the aughts, and that's a whole other conversation. And so people oftentimes interpret my work as like being like, oh, this person's like a recycling advocate. And it's like, no, like I'm somebody who works around themes of apocalypse and post-apocalypse. Like, yeah, I'm not necessarily somebody who is like, I would be in shows with artists where they're like, oh, this is how we're going to save the glaciers or something like that. And then in the next room, I would have an installation that would be like, these are like giant polyester resin swords that would be sold to frost giants in the coming ice age after the end of the world or something. I'm interested in apocalypticism and change. I'm not gonna like make, I think it's dumb. I don't think that like the contemporary art movement is not going to like encourage people to like recycle their way out of environmental collapse. That's not a thing, right? So I'd much rather be a weird conceptualist or like just a general weirdo than somebody who's like, um, you know, pretending that my artwork is going to somehow like save the glaciers on Kilimanjaro or like prevent the Arctic ice shelf from collapsing or any of those kinds of things. I don't think that's the role of contemporary art. So, and so my clothing stuff kind of moved into that because I was always kind of dressed slightly for the apocalypse or something. Yeah, I mean, like, I don't
Something
think
that
I don't think it was a punk rock thing. I don't think of it as like a kind of thing.
I see it a lot as like a change of identity too, you know, like as you know, when you wear something for a long time and you know work on it for like 5 years, you know, and you know as you're changing and these things are like getting together, like getting a new identity, like I see it kind of like that way too.
Hmm. Yeah, I'm very interested in the performance of identity. This has been a key part of my artwork in my life for a long time. So I said earlier that I don't like it when people like do a thing in their life and make it their art, but like from 2012 to 2022, like both as a graduate student, actually as a teacher and then a graduate student and then as a professor again, I wore a sort of semi-uniform called Perverse Schoolboy. And this is before, and so it required me to dress in drag. So I was wearing men's clothes everywhere. And and it was like all Ben Sherman shirts, always rolled to the elbow, tie, always a tie, and then I would tuck the tie in to my shirt. So it was kind of like with a tie bar, um, knickers or plus fours, knee socks, and Oxfords. And I felt there's a lot of complicated stuff here in terms of my own relationship to masculinity, but it was like it felt like a reverse appropriation of colonial aesthetics, and at the same time also like I feel like if a British person saw me wearing this stuff, they might think I was some kind of like weird thug, but Americans thought I was fancy. And so I liked the idea that like, I mean, no one's, it's like I was, but also because of the shorts, it was this notion. I'm 5'3", so there's this notion that I'm this very large child, right? But I'm a very large child who's often doing very adult things. And that's the space that I like to be in as an artist and as a creator in a lot of ways. And that's the space that I like to like think of as my home, is like somebody who is who is you know, um in touch with that narrative. I want I don't want to be a big sophisticated adult all of the time. I actually want to be like a terrifyingly empowered child. That's really important to me. And I held on to that look for a long time until I mean, I work professionally in that. Like there were lots of people who had never seen me outside of that. So it felt like very much like a performance. It went on for 10 years. But I don't think of it as something like if I ever had like a really fancy art exhibition, I really don't want to talk about Perverse Schoolboy at an art show. I don't, that's like not what it is. But I think of it as a drag thing more than anything else. But um and I mean like women who do like cisgender women who do bio drag are like barely recognized now, you know. Maybe someday, years later, people will recognize it as some kind of like cisgender or like I was before I transitioned, like men's bio drag or something like that. I don't know. That's a whole other complicated subject. So yeah, I own a lot of really fancy knickers. That's basically it. And plus fours. I'm kind of like a weird expert on British menswear. And that comes into my life in weird ways still. So yeah.
Is there
Yeah.
like an art thing that you would really like to put forth now?
Uh, at this point, I think like a lot of performance artists, um, I don't just work as a performance artist, but I kind of became one at a certain point. I have had trouble knowing how to perform after the pandemic. It was such a break in my practice. And then a lot of the things that I do that I don't think of as art are actually much more performance art in appearance than the things that I actually might do as a performance art. So like a lot of the stuff that like people in the queer community do as performance art is like BDSM oriented or something like that. And like to me, it's a watered down version of like what happens in the BDSM community. And I don't want to disrespect my own community by like watering something down for an art gallery, even if people think I'm fab for doing it. I'm not here to critique everybody who does that kind of thing, but like as somebody who, does that, I like being known for projects that have a high degree of anonymity, as we talked about online. So and most of my work right now is as a writer. And like one of my favorite pieces that functions in the realm of anonymity and intimacy is at Human Resources Los Angeles. I don't really talk about this publicly that often, but there's a large vulva-shaped glory hole installed between the two upstairs bathroom stalls. And so when after the pandemic, I was asked to perform in a performance with Kim Ye, who's actually one of the directors of Swap LA, and somebody I have a lot of respect for, and Paige Person, who's a performance artist and painter that I have a tremendous amount of respect for and get to work with. I like Paige is somebody I definitely consider a friend. I've known Kim also for a very long time and have a lot of kinship with her. And I was invited to perform at Human Resources, and I didn't know what to do. Like I did not know what to do with my body and how to perform. And so I'm like, okay, I just installed this large, I removed I went in and measured this partition, built a new partition, like, and then installed this glory hole that's shaped like a vulva, and it's actually large enough you can put a whole person through it. It's like I kind of like designed like a non-anonymous, accessibility oriented glory hole, if that makes sense. This is not the first time I've made work that people have sex in, right? Um, and um, and I've never actually used the glory hole at Human Resources in any serious way. It's never come up for me personally. That's not the point. Um, I've done stuff in that bathroom. I just haven't used the glory hole for it. But other people have. And that's been there for like 3 years now. And there was a period where I was being asked to remove it. And I kind of ignored that. And then they put a little privacy curtain over the hole because like, it can be a surprise for some people. And then it says on one side, the text says, would you rather live in the ascendancy of a civilization or in its decline? And on the other side, it says, do you want to fuck or what? Which is a line, it's a quote from the movie Revenge of the Nerds. And which I like. I like this quote a lot. I use a lot of irreverent quotes in my work and like literary and film references in my work. And I hope that stays there for as long as possible. And I'd like to be able to make more projects like that encourage social actions and relationships, particularly sexual or erotic ones, when I am not around, like on their own time, like not as a performance, but like as part of the community, like
And
like the
that's so,
remove what does
I
Maragon want to
love
say?
that. I love that. I just want to, I
Yeah.
want to say, I love that. That,
Yeah. And it's exciting because I never ask, but occasionally people tell me that they've done something in it or that someone has done something in it. And I'm like, good for you. Uh, and and so I'd like to do, I like doing things like that are interventions in space like that. And I like doing work that's, about media and literature at this point. And so that's a lot of my work is in the realm of writing, but I love fostering intimacy in weird ways. I like the fact that like I kind of hate the idea of a glory hole in general. I mean, there's something I think it's I mean I'm gonna talk about it. It's only interesting if you're interested in like degradation or something, right? Like I feel like it's inherently kind of I'm not into shame, so I feel like if you're into degradation, I feel like the glory hole might be kind of exciting for you. But I wanted a glory hole that was more celebratory than degradatory. That would be the work that I want to make in that way. And it's funny. It's definitely funny. Like I've been up in the bathroom up there with a friend and like I remember she like pulled her pants down and put her butt through it and it was like the funniest. It was like funny. I don't know why because it wasn't like I don't know. It sounds like it was more like being mooned than it was like come get it or something. And this is a very old friend and I was like this is the funniest picture I have of you. Like this is in my and so I like that kind of thing. And I definitely appreciate the fact that it's in a bathroom and I tend to feel like scatology is both the lowest and highest form of humor. So unlike puns, which are the lowest form of humor, scatology occupies both positions simultaneously, you know. So, and I mean, that gets to me like a lot of the stuff that we do as contemporary artists that people feel like is transgressive is not transgressive. It really, really is it's very safe and it doesn't make me feel titillated. It doesn't make me feel brave a lot of the time. I'd rather if I want to feel titillated by art, I have friends who are dancers. I'll go throw money at them. I'm gonna go to a bar later. I'm gonna throw dancer money at one of my good friends because like they're awesome. You know, and I'm going to tell them you're awesome, and that's going to be it. I don't want to go see contemporary art for the purpose of feeling like I saw an edgy thing or something. So that's my take on that. I don't know. I just like to get away with doing weird stuff. So that's the short end of it. I think there's people like me who are in the arts because we do like want to get away with doing weird stuff or something. That
Come
might be
on.
part of it.
Of course. And the
Yeah.
world is our playground.
So yeah. I'm not, I don't know. I kind of withdrew from that world mostly. So I teach and I teach mostly in media industry stuff. So I'm when I was talking earlier about, oh, I don't think the contemporary art's going to like change like social attitudes or save the world. I do think that pop culture and media can because it's just so much more influential. So I am so excited that a lot of my students like go and work on like they go work at like, major studios and make things that like really influence people's whole lives. And a lot of the stuff I see in contemporary art is like in a circle with contemporary art. And it's exciting for a lot of like very privileged people and completely alien and foreign to most people. But if someone like gets their show on Netflix or Cartoon Network, like, 100,000 people see it, you know, and that matters in a way, that like, I don't know, that contemporary art can't matter in. So I don't know, but I'm avoiding getting drafted to be in something horrible like the Whitney Biennial or the Venice Biennial or something, which I think would be the worst thing that could happen to me as an artist.
Interesting. Why do you feel that?
I just feel like it would be so embarrassing. I know
Okay.
I have friends who are in those shows. I have friends who do that. I always have a friend in the Whitney every year, like in that or every 2 years. It's always somebody I work with is always in there, and I'm happy for them because they want to work in that world. For me, I feel like it would be like this is awkward.
And on that note,
yeah, I would not show. I take the money and run.
yeah, well, fair. Not wrong at all.
That's my take.
I think we've now hit the hour mark. If this is good for you, I didn't want to take up too much of your time unless somebody else has another question.
I just want to see if there's anything in the chat or anything like that. I'd love to answer any last questions from either of y'all or anybody.
Yeah.
See Laura poking at things. Laura's just poking. Oh, there.
You know, I touch it 3 times in the right place. It just does nothing, nothing. Um, it's really interesting the contrast between post-apocalyptic and tradition maintaining and community. And I'm just it's not a well-formed question. It's more like throw spaghetti at the wall. Like, how do you wrestle with that contradiction?
I don't
Or
wrestle
do you
at all.
find it not a contradiction?
It's not a contradiction because Indigenous people and globally, um, Indigenous people globally, but I'm talking Indigenous people in North America specifically. Indigenous people in North America have been living in the post-apocalypse for over 500 years now, right? So
Yes.
all, every, I mean, this is, I mean, I think you could argue that every traditional Indigenous art that exists in North America exists in a post-apocalypse and exists as, like, to some degree, you can't exist in a post-apocalypse and not be affected by the apocalypse, if that makes any sense, right? So like ribbon skirts, all kinds of Native American like traditional clothing and things are regalia are like a lot of the like jingle dresses, they involve trade objects. Like jingle dresses existed before the apocalypse, right? But they weren't the same as they are now. They didn't involve like little metal like things that were, that you could trade for. So a lot of Native American traditional art forms are reliant on trade with essentially like European, like settler colonials, right? Because they changed that. There are obviously things that didn't change. I don't want to say that everything has changed because of that, but so everything, if you're Native American, everything that is traditional exists both in a post-apocalyptic state and in defiance of the post-apocalyptic state. And there's a notion, I mean, as a Native American, like the language that often Native American people use would be like, we've been here since time immemorial. Like, I don't care how old your like spear point or your arrowhead or your bone fragment is. Like, we have been on this land in some form or another since time immemorial, right? This is a metaphysical belief. This is not, it does not care about science. It does not care about anthropology. And we will be here until the end of time, right? So at the same time that we live in relationship to this chronology and this post-apocalypse, this apocalypse, like, I think that anybody who's Indigenous, whether there's somebody like me who's like often a city Indian, like I was adopted outside of my culture. I live in Los Angeles. I don't live on the res. I'm not part of a clan. I'm not in contact with the tribal identity in any specific way. I live in Indigenous culture in a very like urban way, right? You know, and all of us find our place in that culture and our role in that culture. And there's roles I can't fill because of my point of origin. There's roles other people can, right? But we really do believe, I think most of us, that we will be here after this. We will this isn't the first time the apocalypse has happened, right?
Yeah.
Our existence is continual, but it exists in relationship to that. I mean, and if you look at the entire history of the post-apocalypse doesn't exist until basically the atomic bomb, right? So basically, like Europeans, settler colonials, basically the Russians, Germans, and Americans all invent the atomic bomb basically around the same time. Americans just have it first, right? The Americans invent the atomic bomb, and we now can blow up the whole planet, right? As soon as the atomic bomb is developed, right? This is before the ICBMs and like the total destruction, right? This is like as soon as it's developed, and by the time the early 50s, we start to see post-apocalyptic science fiction develop, which is a narrative essentially that white folks tell themselves that we have found a way to destroy the planet, but don't worry, somebody will survive. So all post-apocalyptic fiction is actually optimistic in its fantasy that like there is a story of the future in which you still exist. But the irony of this is a very like awkward irony, is that in that white, because it's often just white people after the post-apocalypse in these movies, right? In that often that white post-apocalypse, like they resemble Indigenous people. They're in tribes and clans, and they're engaged in tribal warfare, and they have like feathers and bones in their hair, and they're like noble savages, and everybody's a warrior and all this kind of crap. And so like, like the fantasy of the post-apocalypse is fundamentally tied to the fantasy of noble savages and the fantasy of indigeneity as possessed in the Western mind. And in other words, they like the safety valve for total war. Because before this, we just had Armageddon. The world will end. Like it will be the end times in the Bible and it will end. It was like, an eschatological event. It was not a military event, right? These are just cosmological events. But now that we have cosmological power in our own minds, right, it gets very different. And so there's this safety valve, and it's like, oh, how will white people survive the apocalypse? Well, they'll become like Indians or something, right? It's like it's very awkward. And some of my favorite Native American artists are Native American artists who engage with science fiction. A lot of Native American artists love science fiction. And there's so much good Native science fiction because like to some degree, indigenous artists globally, not just in North America, are indigenous to a certain kind of post-apocalypse, right? So, like Western people, because of climate change, Western people are about to experience apocalypse for the first time. But other people experienced it 500 years ago, right? And this is the specific definition of indigeneity that I'm interested in, is people who survived the colonial period, right? That's what happened, is you experienced this destruction in the colonial period. So in this past 500 years, you were displaced from your traditional lands, right?
And you can tell I'm squirming with a second question.
Go for it, Laura.
Squirming with a second question. So if there's this metaphysical connection to this community and this culture, and you're bringing something with a material tradition to people who are displaced or detached from or removed from for a variety of reasons. What, you probably have more than one answer, but what is the metaphysical or spiritual or deep human response that people are having from engaging in this process?
I mean, I don't feel like I'm far enough into my Ribbon Script project to understand that. I'm just really hoping that people who are indigenous, particularly queer people who are indigenous, and two-spirit and trans people, feel more comfortable and welcome to be part of indigenous community. Feel like they can show up. One of the things that I do is, so I have I have a BDSM leather pride flag, indigenous ribbon skirt. And I oftentimes will wear that on the first day of a BDSM or like a leather conference or gathering. Why? I immediately meet every other indigenous person in the space. I immediately start meeting people who are like me and who are interested in what I'm doing. And even if it's only, oh, I mean, that's a really awkward environment to feel alone in, or to know 3 people and there's 500 people around, right? I immediately know a bunch of other people, right? I immediately get to meet a bunch of other people. And I feel like as there are more indigenous events in urban areas and stuff like that, there are more events that focus on and encourage two-spirit people to participate in particular, and trans people to participate in particular, as indigenous people get better in touch with, like our history of gender diversity, which is frankly like less destroyed than the history of gender diversity within settler colonial cultures, right? That hopefully people will take that and run with it, that they'll feel comfortable, and it's not just for young people. Like there's an elder in another city who's like waiting for me to do a workshop there because like she's broke and she doesn't have a ribbon skirt. She's not queer. I mean, like a lot of indigenous people are not retired, but they're just like too old to work and broke and poor. They're poor and increasingly, I don't want to start disabled, like increasingly elderly, things are harder. I don't know. Like I'm 46 and things feel hard now. And I know that other people will laugh at me about that. But like, I'm a very physical person. And at 46, like I'm not physical in the same way I was at 36 or 26. So,
Yeah.
so I'm hoping that people feel more able to like participate in culture. People feel more able to be part of their community, and I think traditions and these kinds of things, they're very traditional, but they they grow and change,
Oh yeah.
And what I encounter from elders all the time is elders are super cool with that. Elders are like very much like, yeah, go have fun with it. You know, elders are not like, there are things about which one must be very specific. And there are things that are traditional that one must learn to have fun with. One must learn to be in a state of joy about. And that's how I feel about the ribbon skirts. Like it's something that should come out of a state of joy, you know. Except when you have to sew a pocket into one of them.
Those are always important too. This is terrific.
Yeah. Thanks, Laura.
Thank you.
Thank you. That was
Thanks, Mary.
All right. Well, that was really awesome. I really appreciate it, and I hope you have a great evening.
I will, whether I like it or not.